Alex Merklinger's Mysteries of the Mind. And now your host, Alex Merklinger.
Welcome to our show, my friends. This is kind of a special one because we have with us on the line one of our really good friends, Clif Webbot. How's that, Clif?
That's fine.
That's good. The reason being, and I'll announce it also, that Clif is a scheduled guest for next Tuesday, but so much has been going on, obviously, with the Hurricane Katrina, and I want to remind everybody that when Clif was on the show 2 weeks ago, Clif?
Yes, I think it was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, you announced at that time that we were going to have a major hurricane storm, and we were going to have some pretty bad devastation. And if I recall, did you say about quite a loss of life?
Yes, yeah, there was that. There was also the imagery of the millions of feet on the road and all the abandoned goods lining the roadways.
Right.
Pretty much everything we're seeing is the images.
Yeah.
Things like this point out very much that what we appear to be getting are the most commonly shared visual impressions. So, I mean, I hate to put it this way because everybody will misunderstand, but it is as though we're able to sort of see a fuzzy TV picture of a few weeks ahead or a few months ahead.
Right, right.
In this particular case, we had a fuzzy TV picture start to emerge back in January when we ran our first series of reports. At the time, we had a tendency to discount it, but given the event of the Sumatran tsunami, we had to take two possible paths. Either our data set was polluted by everybody thinking about such things, in which case what we were seeing would not occur, or in spite of the fact that it had been heightened in everybody's consciousness, a yet larger event was still pending. We chose the latter half to err on the side of caution and look like a fool if we were wrong.
Sure, right.
Unfortunately, that was not the case.
Exactly. You know, one of the problems with the forewarning and foreknowing, if that's a proper term, is that very few people do something about it, and in the case of New Orleans, there's very little that people could do anything about it. As a result, look what's happening now. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's going on there.
Well, that would be true in the short sense, but let's remember that if we'd really thought about this 10 years ago, a great deal could have been done.
Of course. If the powers that be, the government, would listen.
Right. Essentially, if they weren't such assholes, that would be certainly the case.
Yes. Well, I know the word, too. I've used it a few times today. Now, Clif, in addition to the prediction, I was going to say
the city going into the mud,
Yes.
Returning to the mud from which the bricks were made was the more poetic version of it,
Do you or have you been able to determine or decipher what the immediate future will be for New Orleans, Biloxi, and that whole area down there?
Now you're getting into an area in which we can apply analysis, and that's an entirely different set of features relative to our predictive work. In other words, the Webbot stuff, we try and get as large a look ahead as we can. Bearing in mind this all purely for entertainment purposes for the unengaged mind to do something with.
Right. Okay.
Now, that having been said, our goal is never to really concentrate on anything that's current, but rather to filter out from the current the preconscious vibrations of what may be ahead in a few months. And we're doing it on an emotional level. It doesn't really quite work that way. We can certainly apply the standard ladder math to the spread of any disaster and suggest that this is going to seriously impact the nation as a whole. We're going to have gasoline shortages, food shortages, that kind of thing ripple out for months. New Orleans won't be rebuilt. It'll end up being too toxic of a hellhole. It'll be hit by other hurricanes just as it's getting into the process of getting things cleaned up, and so on. So now, associated with our thing about the city going back into mud was the other one where we had a city sliding down a hill, presumably because of earthquake activity.
Right.
And that shared a certain temporal closeness. This, again, was back in January, let's bear in mind. So both the idea of rampaging water and earth tremors were fresh in everybody's mind, and we had to kind of like say, well, they're there, and, here they are, take them with a huge lump of skepticism. But given the recent events, we think, well, there's maybe a higher order of probability that the other part of that associated grouping is also likely to occur. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. I'm afraid
with each and every roll of the dice towards a given goal, where you want to state, I want to roll 5 5s in a row.
Yeah.
Every time you roll the first 5, you build, so to speak, as you go towards the next, until finally it becomes a certainty.
That doesn't portend for some really good times. And, of course, the only thing that we don't know at this time is where is the landslide city going to be.
Well, we don't know if it will occur.
Yeah,
we don't
right.
know where it would occur, and we don't know the timing.
Yeah.
The things that we do have hints about are magnitude, in which we get the word great. But let's also be real clear. Some people that are in the business of geology might apply the word great to an earthquake that's 8.0. But having survived the 6.8 around here, I'd be a little bit more generous on a personal level and say, a 6.8 qualifies as a great earthquake.
Yeah, I guess it does. I've been in, I think, a 2 in L.A., and I was gone out of there in 2 days, so I can imagine what it was like for you guys. I
was 9 miles from the epicenter, and it damaged the property severely. Still lots of it unrepaired.
Wow.
And it was quite the shake-up. I went through the 8.0s in Mexico City in 94. And that was bad, but actually the 6.8 up here was personally inexperienced in a worse fashion.
My gosh. Obviously, Cliff, everybody, the first thing that we think of when we think of a devastating earthquake is California, because that's where they all go. But
if you're USA centric, that's your view, certainly.
Yeah, but it could also be anywhere. I mean, if
it could be Tehran, it could be Japan. In fact, there's a lot to suggest that the weaker parts of the planet at the moment are those, if you will, vaguely triangular tips of the larger plates. So that would present the Pacific plate, that would present the Honshu Ridge,
right,
against which we have the Inzo Trench and a few other trenches merging as a weak spot, with which would present, logically, the most likely spot for such a large shift to occur.
Yeah, and did it say, or does it say, any idea of the loss of property and the loss of life and something like that?
We get, now again, this is our typical language,
right.
So we get the word many, great, multitudes, millions. Numbers can become confusing, and they imply something that I really hesitate to get involved with. For instance, repeatedly in January, we were saying 13 millions on the road, as a result of the water issues. Well, repeatedly now we see 1.3 millions in all the little crawls and headlines. Obviously, our decimal points don't work.
Yeah, right.
Okay, but it would seem to be a close enough fit that I can say, again, our interpretation's screwed up. So, again, we have to say millions. Now, that's on the order, and in this case, it might be literally 13 millions, because there are many places that fit the conditions of a reasonably arid, recently dry, relatively elevated city area that's prone to earthquakes. Could be anything from Mexico City to Tokyo, etc.
Sure, absolutely.
And in those cases, millions would be affected.
Absolutely. Cliff, does it say any indication of the time sequence from the storm, the city going back to the mud, and possibly when the landslide, or let's say the earthquake, might occur?
No, again, we don't have any numeric value that could provide comfort or fear for anybody. What we have is the idea of a temporal closeness, where one event is seen next to the other in our fuzzy TV picture, and we can't really separate out from the background which is going to happen when. We just know that they're somehow associated in a temporal fashion. Now, that would imply anything from a week to many, many months, but on a personal level, I would say 7 months or so would seem to be unlikely.
Unlikely or likely?
Unlikely. I would think it would occur prior to that in order to have our temporal closeness, because you have to understand how humans think of time. Basically, we have this, we all operate on pretty much a weekly schedule. A certain amount of us operate on a monthly and others on a quarterly basis, and it all aggregates together into basically sort of a short, intermediate, and So this is seen as within a near boundary, and near we've been defining as 8 months or less.
Gosh.
But that's just a guess we've applied that seems reasonable at the time.
Yeah. You know, we've had quite a few of our listeners contact us, because the last couple of times you've been on, you talked about the woman of dark